Okay, welcome everyone. Thank you for coming to one of our theme seminars on artists working with oral history and vice versa. We have three wonderful and very different artists here today who are going to show us some very different aspects of art practice utilising memory work or oral histories. When we consider how interviews relate to art, we remember firstly that art is a powerful tool for representing human experience and emotions. That it helps oral and public histories to tap into different kinds of knowledge and knowledge production. Even though we have different ways of knowing the past. We can see that interviews can be utilised in the history of art practice. There are now quite a big industry in oral histories with artists and the art process. And also as a means to kind of explore how identities operate in the art world. But mainly today we'll be exploring how oral history is actually used in or is integral to art practice. This seminar draws oral histories into a creative domain, especially one which utilises both the visual, of course, with art, but also sound, and maybe sometimes touch and even smell, in a kind of sensual dialogue. But importantly, it also shows us how to view oral history in a context that extends its ability to interpret experience, I think, in different ways. These artists have been particularly successful in telling difficult and challenging histories to the public, and arguably some say art is a better way of presenting challenging and difficult histories to the public. But they also make imaginative connections across space and time. Even more important, they often challenge standard meanings and interpretations of the past. But this potentially fruitful collaboration between oral historians and artists is not just about connection on the one hand and interpretation, but also potentially for us different ways of doing things. Some of the most innovative projects around the world, for example, have involved modifying or disrupting traditional institutional roles of curators, artists and audiences. But that's if you're working in an institution as an artist. Often it's outside institutions involving communities like I know some of you do, that individuals have been more successful in sharing creative control and power. Finally, as oral historians and public historians, we've had to develop a lot of new skills in the telling of our stories to the public. Digital and visual literacy, something that I found incredibly difficult when you're a writer, is vitally important to communication, as well as understanding the role of sound as being absolutely central, as we will see today. So, without further ado, I'd like to introduce our first speaker, who is Therese Sweeney, and who's an artist based out of the Media Studio in the south coast of New South Wales. For over 2 decades, Therese has used oral history to inform her photography and video practice. She's worked with communities all over the place, and I've been privileged to be involved with some of them. She has worked with communities in southwest Sydney, brilliant series of videos in King's Cross and New South Wales Coast, among others. But I'll turn you over to Therese.
Hi. Thank you all for coming today. I'm going to do my best. I think we're talking for 10 to 15 minutes. So I think what's important for me to sort of state from the beginning is that I started my work in community in the early 90s and it was a period of deep reflection before I stepped into that. I'd left state government as a senior policy analyst. I resigned in 91, and I sat on my couch for 18 months and got up with a camera. I grew up in southwest Sydney in a public housing estate called Green Valley, which is 6 suburbs of 5-row housing that I'd grown up from the age of 2 in 1963. My family had moved there from east Sydney to southwest Sydney. So I worked in state government departments like legal aid, corrective services, family and community services. So I got to experience a bureaucracy in areas of my interest. So I'm just stating that from the beginning because that has, I wanted to learn more about those bureaucracies. So I started as a photographer. I studied a BA Communications at UTS in 1995. So I studied film, sound, and social history and politics was my theory major, where I met people like Paula and Paul Ashton, who became really a collaborator for 20 years. So after I graduated, I worked shopfront, basically supported my work for 20 years at UTS. So of course at university I'm learning sound. I'm doing a few sound subjects. I'm learning how to use sound, and I'm learning how to cut moving image into stories. And I'm doing all my work on Green Valley. So every time I get something to do, a first video project, I do a 3-minute video on something to do with Green Valley. So all my work at university was about where I grew up, and I started to engage residents at that point. Primarily, my motivation, which has impacted all my work, was about building respectful relationship within community. And I went on my own journey and still do that to this day. So it was about deep engagement, embedded in community for years, sometimes even before I brought out a camera. So that's just stating that. So it was about building respectful relationships with the community that I had been embedded in for 21 years and still have very strong connections to. So of course I'm learning sound at university. I'm making films where I've got great sound designers that I'm working with, and I'm learning all about those things. And my grandmother grew up during the Depression, and she's aging, and I thought I'd better go and record Grandma's story. I've got all this great sound recording equipment, and I can record at broadcast quality because I can access the equipment. So I did recordings with my grandmother for 8 months. She worked through the Depression, she ran her own business, she had 11 children. That was the beginning of my oral history. That was my first oral history. And what I started to realise and get awareness around, of course, is that how powerful oral history is and how powerful storytelling is. So I started to become very attracted to developing research and doing layers of media work because I had the skills. So, and I would do layers of engagement, perhaps with, a group or one person. I might introduce that person to portraits. They might, I worked with a group on the housing estate that I wanted to do a series on bus stops because transport was basically non-existent, Yeah, when I remember Mum walking, 6 kids, a number of kilometres to get the bus, And where I grew up was the highest concentration of children in the Southern Hemisphere at that time, and they were building schools on the run. There was an interesting area, and we were battered by the media, yet there were these extraordinary people that I knew in the community that didn't correlate with my lived experience. So this was my primary motivation, to redress that and to archive. So I've archived everything I've done into the State Library. Started buying my photography. I started exhibiting at the local regional gallery, and I started exhibiting in libraries. I think I got some of my first photos published straight away in a history book because the historian that I was, to be honest, the historian that I'd met had forgotten about Green Valley, and he sort of added a chapter to the book that he was working on, and the book concluded with about 6 of my photographs, and they were some of my first photos. And of course, the more you engage with people, the better your work's going to be, because, you know, the more relaxed they are in front of camera. I didn't know how to use a camera. I learned on the job, and at those times it was film. Digital technology was being introduced halfway through my degree, so I'm going from cutting film to learning how to use tape, and so I can do both things, but I've always shot black and white film for a very long time. And I wanted to take, you know, that historical element of media photography being the dominant, and the dominant taking photos of disadvantaged communities, and hearing my parents and their community be very frustrated with how they were being represented. I remember that as a child. So I believed I had something to offer my community, and I did. And so I took up my space to do that. And yeah, so that's kind of the beginning. So, you know, how do you live? How do you live doing what you want to do? Well, I've generated, I wrote to, because I had a background in government, I knew I could, you know, I was very good at project management. I wrote to the mayor. I knew how to access and knew the protocols. You know, the mayor gave me a studio, he gave me money for film. You know, I wrote to all the I wrote to people telling them what I'm doing. This is in 94 or something. And, you know, and they were excited, and so I'd always engage and inform, and I've always done that, but I've always kept outside, because for me, I can work far, I know protocols, I can work far quicker generating my own work and working directly with community, because you have to be so cost effective because you're living on the smell of an oil rag, and you might engage with a gallery and get paid $200 for 6 months work, and they've got 45 staff working on the same exhibition, and they hand you $200. So, you know, I had to go out and learn, you know, so that's the sort of things you're dealing with. They're the realities, you know, big exhibitions sometimes, and getting nothing for them. You know, they're asking for you to produce this, that and that, and then they're paying you, you know, $90 or something, you know. And a lot of these organisations didn't know my background, previous background in government. I just simply observed the systems, and later started demanding at least some money to cover my time if it was I had to make films for 6 months, short videos. I'd started to negotiate bigger salaries, and they were shocked that I'd asked for $10,000 to produce 4 short films that were going to be projected onto buildings that I was going to be working on for 6 months. But I got it because I just started to deal harder, and they probably thought I was a pain. But, you know, I started to speak up. So, Green Valley, I started to, because you've got to do these projects for the love of it, you know. So I did a long time for the love of it. I did extensive oral histories with residents. My parents and community built the school that I went to, called, funnily enough, St. Therese Primary School. It still runs today. So we had Sacred Heart nuns that came out from King Cockle to Green Valley in the mid-60s. Yes, amazing history. I've done history with all of those nuns, extensive oral histories. They're all online through UTS on my own archive there. Yeah, so I did what I could. I did what I could, efficiently as I could. There's a walking group called the Green Valley Walkers. Now, a lot of them are pioneering residents from the early 60s. Some of them are not, some of them have just joined in the last 10 years. So I used to go on the bus with that group, okay? So I went on the bus about 5 times with that group. And one time I might take their photos. The next time I had a camera operator with me, and we did video histories on the bus. because I thought, well, that's efficient, you know, I can interview 100 people. You know, it's this sort of work, so you're re-engaging them all the time. Then I thought, well, one of you really is quite interesting in terms of your story, it might have touched me somehow, and so then that person might be projected onto a building. Okay, I did a series on buildings out there. They were silent, short pieces because the women weren't seeing. Then I moved to the market gardens, which is just, I started to meet families that had been third generation, second generation, that used to have all the farming land where the housing estate was built, and they'd just been moved out a bit. So then I started to document contemporary farming practices and do extensive oral history work with the migrant market gardeners. Okay, now I raised $250,000 privately from 4 people to do an 8-year project, and that's the way I did it, because I met with governments for 12 months, different people, different heads of government. I know how to get access. Everyone loved what I was wanting to do. I saw not 1 cent at the end of 12 months of engaging politicians and heads of cultural institutions. Everyone wanted it, and I'd already been there for, you know, it wasn't like they didn't know me. I was there for 12, I'd been proving myself. So I thought I developed a strategy to raise money privately, because there were some wealthy people out there by then now. So I developed a whole pitch, and I set up a not-for-profit, and the university were part of it. And I raised money to do an extensive oral history program with the market gardeners. And I did extensive photography, and I made probably about 10 films. All that is archived. The films are currently being looked at to go online. They'll be online in maybe 6 months. But the sound and photography is all online through UTS. Then there was a position advertised for an oral historian at Belgenny Farm, Camden Park, which is the next frontier, isn't it? Back. So John MacArthur, sheep industry. So they advertised for an oral historian, basically to do the 20th century workers' histories. So I thought, oh, well, I'll apply for that. I'd have to be well placed because of the work I've done out here. But I think they were deliberating over someone who had published many books, and myself, and the woman on the committee knew that they needed me because I had the media skills. And Paul Ashton was my referee, which got me the job, I think. Anyway, I got the job. It became a 7-year project. I engaged 80 former workers during the 20th century. They thought they might get half a dozen interviews. I interviewed 80 people, extensive oral histories, new photography collections from all of those people, my own photography, and I uncovered and found the whole pre-tractor photography that had been stolen by a manager. So cui Bruno. So you know, they were very pleased with me, and I worked with a guy called the state government owned it, except for Camden Park House, and Cameron Archer, Dr. Cameron Archer, who was working for Primary Industries at the time. The minute he knew I was all right, you know, I basically ran my own show and just submitted to him who I was interviewing, and that was fully paid and resourced. Oh, I was rich. You know, it kept me going. You know, just those blocks of interviews, it kept me going for a long time. And so I kept finding more people because it kept me going, and it was working for everybody. Because and of course, that program plus the market garden program, the question, you know, was well-framed programs. You know, the extensive. I had to do extensive questionnaire formats. We set all the protocols at the beginning, and I did the same with the migrant market gardeners because I was responding to my committee, who I'd set up, established a committee for the not-for-profit, which I called Memory Bank at the time. So I have had this great life on the fringes of southwest Sydney. So I have all this research that's being logged at all the local libraries, the institutions, the galleries have my work, whatever it might be. And I've always wanted to have outcomes with what I've done. Like I'm a bit different. I don't know. I always find it difficult being an artist, what that means, but my sound, you know, if I've got installations, I use my sound wholly to archive, and then I'll use blocks of it for different things. And everyone I'm engaging knows that. Sometimes I say that when I did the Pioneers of the Fringe project with the market gardeners, I actually didn't know really the potential of the project and what it might be used for. I said, you know, but it was all listed in the release forms. It could be publications, films, you know, but they knew absolutely it was going to be archived. State Library have also been given all the Hampton Park project, and what I said to Cameron at the end is that we should just do an edit of everything and at least give the community a little book who participated, and he said what a good idea, so there's that, and they were grateful for that. So, you know, that's a series of 2,250,000 words down to 30,000 words, and I did that in 8 weeks. I had to edit, but I knew it, but I had to edit all their stories down to a cohesive history, and there's photos in there and everything. And that's sold through Belgany Farm, and I made sure everyone got a free copy that was on the project, and Paula actually launched that. Paula would know some of my work because I've spoken with her at university and she knows. And this is my latest book. This is just, so I'm writing too. God, it's hard, isn't it? Writing, I mean. So I'm, you know, I'm a writer. So that's the second book. That nearly killed me. So that's market garden history. So I was commissioned by the wealthiest Croatian family in the market gardens, who have one of the biggest dairy operations, the Perich family, and are building Oran Park Town and Gregory Hills, and have Luddenham land parcels for Sydney Airport. That's their family history from the mid-19th century up to this present day. I got that when I got home. That was about a month off press. It's a private book. It's not for sale. It's for their employees and their family primarily, and government and whoever else they deal with. But I'm proud of that because that took everything I had to write that book, I tell you. But I knew the family. I met them in 2005 when I was doing some photography. Anyway, that's the latest. And I finished another one for a private woman who's a chef, Croatian chef. Croatian. That's it. And now I'm moving into hopefully screenwriting. And that's me. Thanks for listening.
Now I'd like to introduce, questions probably at the end, discussion and questions at the end. Okay with everyone? Yeah. Now I'd like to introduce Fabri Blacklock, whose family are Nukurilma Nagarabal. Is that right? Just show you I should have done Aboriginal languages. It's so beautiful. From Tinga and Glen Innes and Biripi people from Dingo Creek in New South Wales. Fabri is a textile artist, and her work involves the revival and teaching of New South Wales Aboriginal women's artistic practices. So she's going to tell you all about that.
Thank you. I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners just before we begin and pay my respect to our elders both past and present. And thank you to Bruce and Paula for inviting me here today. I think the original date was changed just to fit my schedule because in August my son is his grand final, so I couldn't miss that, and he actually won. So he doesn't care, he's on video so I guess I'll start from the beginning. So I too did a BA Communications at UTS, and I graduated in '99, and then I began my career as assistant curator of career history and culture at the Powerhouse Museum. And there I worked, my boss was James Wilson Miller. Do any of you know James or Jimmy Miller? No, so he wrote a book, really great book if you can get hold of it. Probably it's out of print, so you have to get it from a library, called Courier Will to Win. And that was basically, yeah, you were familiar with it. So that was his family stories based on, oral histories that he recorded with his mother and aunties and uncles. And from there, I guess that's sort of where my passion for oral history began. And I worked at the Powerhouse from '99 to 2008. And James was a really wonderful mentor to me, and his wife is Professor Rhonda Craven, who's the director of the Institute for Positive Psychology and Education at ACU, which I used to work at before I started at UNSW. I'm in the senior lecturer in the art and design faculty now. And so I met Rhonda through James, and she said, "Oh, you should do a PhD." And I was like, "Oh, okay, all right," because I wanted to record oral histories with my family. So going back, I did. So at my BA Communications I majored in film and video and Aboriginal Studies. So I guess, you know, growing up through my whole life, I'd been listening to stories. We often have fires in our backyards, and just listening to my elders talk about, you know, their lives growing up and, you know, the challenges that they faced, particularly coming from small towns like Tinga and Cleanliness and Gyra, and, you know, a lot of the racism that they faced, and also not, you know, when I went to school, we didn't learn about Aboriginal history and culture. It was just like, you know, Captain Cook came and Aboriginal people were there, and that was it. And so I guess I wanted to learn more about, I guess, the theoretical and political sort of aspects, and that's why I chose to go to the UTS. And I guess from there I started making the correlation between what I learned at university and what I've been hearing from my elders. So Rhonda's like very involved in PhD, so you know, the application took me like weeks to put together because I didn't have any publications. I didn't have a postgraduate degree, so the application was like this big. And I think if I knew then how much work was going to be, I wouldn't have done it. So she's like, "Oh, I'll walk in the park, you'll be fine, you know, you'll be right." And about, how long did it take me? It took me, like, I started in 2006 and I graduated in 2014, so that's how long it took me. I had 2 kids in the meantime. Yeah, so it was a big challenge, and so for my PhD I interviewed 6 of my family elders, and also included a series of artworks that my elders had created throughout their lives, so that the oral histories sort of and the artworks were complementary to each other, and I included the artworks within the case studies. So I was very particular about how my PhD was going to be presented, and I guess that's a really big struggle as an Aboriginal person, is dealing with academia and, you know, traditional knowledges and our, I guess, our epistemologies, our ways of being, knowing and doing are very they don't complement each other. So I was very insistent that my family histories were individualised case studies within the PhD. I didn't want any academic writing or any, you know, words that they didn't understand. I wanted that to be completely separate. So there were 6 individual case studies with 6 different elders, and also I wrote quite extensively in the methodology about, you know, Aboriginal methodologies and why they're important, and I'll talk a little bit more about that later on. So from there, where did I go from there? So then I started a company with my ex-partner. It was called Warumbi Designs, and we did a lot of we did some public artworks. We did a lot of work with universities, in schools. We did work with Lead Lease, Greater Western Sydney Giants, and a couple of the projects I worked on. So the first one was with the City of Sydney Council. So have you all seen Tony Albert's memorial in Hyde Park? You can't miss it, like it's impossible, the big bullets. So I was employed or contracted to record oral histories with Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander servicemen and women and their families. And you can find those oral histories at sydneyoralhistories.org.au, I think. So it's part of the City of Sydney's, they've got a dedicated oral history department, which is amazing. And that website also holds all the oral histories that they've recorded with a broad range of people. So it's telling stories of Sydney from the people. So you can find those oral histories there that I recorded. That was a really interesting project. I met some really amazing people who served our country, some really, I guess, some quite distressing stories as well. One in particular was from Auntie Jenny Beale, and she told the story of her father and uncle who had fought in the war. They became prisoners of war, and her father actually got caught in, they were working them like 20 hours a day and they were having minimal sleep, not getting much food. Anyway, cut a long story short, his foot was caught in one of the machines and he ended up bleeding to death. And so his brother had his ashes, was ready, when they finally got released, was ready to come back on the ship back to Australia, and they wouldn't let him, for some reason, they wouldn't let him take the ashes. So she's still trying to find those ashes or where he's buried overseas. So that was probably one of the most distressing stories. Another one of Mr. Siren, I can't remember his name, sorry, he's Gordon Siren's son, if you know who Gordon Siren is. He went to Warranda and, it was actually a little bit like a counselling session. I was shocked. He was just telling me these horrific stories. Like he just said as soon as he landed, all you could smell was like dead bodies, and you just go into these places and like people just completely slaughtered, and it was really quite horrific. And I don't think I said a word. Usually when you're recording old histories, you're asking questions as you go along. I don't think I asked very many. It was, and then at the end I said, "Did you have any counselling when you got back?" And he's like, "Oh no, they just sent us up to the jungle in Queensland, and that was our debriefing session." So yeah, you can listen to all them online. And then another project I did was called Sharing Heritage Stories with Blue Mountain City Council. And as part of that, I recorded three separate projects, because as you may or may not know, sometimes working with Aboriginal communities, there's a little bit of, some people don't necessarily get along, so it's quite important that you consult all people from the community and make sure that everybody's happy. And through that was guided by Brad Moore, who's the Aboriginal Community Liaison Officer for Blue Mountain City Council. And so I decided to do three very separate projects with three different groups of people. And one of them I recorded some stories. It was with the women, so they actually had a possum skin. So actually, sorry, going back, it was actually part of the. They wanted to call it a commemoration, the Blue Mountain City Council. So it was part of the anniversary of working with Lawson and Blackstone, crossing the Blue Mountains. So obviously the Aboriginal community felt very left out as part of that. They didn't want to see it as a celebration, because you can't really celebrate having your land taken from you. So as part of that, I recorded a couple of videos, and you can, sorry, I don't actually have any copies of them. I was supposed to get some off Brad, but if you ring Blue Mountain City Council and ask for Brad Moore, he'll send you some DVDs. And so I recorded a day at the Blue Mountains Cultural Centre in Katoomba, and it was a group of Aboriginal and non-Aboriginal women with Marie Clark, who's from Victoria, and that's part of the revival of possum skin cloak making. I'm not sure how familiar you all are with that, and that's something I did some research on that way back in like 2001, 2002 for the National Book Register. I don't think it's online anymore. So basically I did some research on some of the remaining traditional possum skin cloaks, and because possum skins deteriorate quite rapidly, so there were very few left in any museums or institutions around the world. And so this was a really beautiful day. It was, it was basically just, I had the table set out, and it was, just women coming together, sewing. We just sat there and sewed the cloaks together, and then I interviewed a couple of women separately in a room, and then the cloak was actually worn as, it was a commemorative day up at Mount Victoria. So it was the original, sorry, I can't remember the actual place, but it was the original road that goes down. It's not the Great Western, it's the original road. No, it wasn't Bells, it's on this side. It's just off the highway, but it was the original road that went down into Lithgow. And so there were descendants of the traditional owners, and there were also descendants of Blackstone, Lawson and Wentworth. And we walked along the track, and then we had lunch, and then we had a bit of a ceremony. And as part of that, the women had the possum skin cloak that we'd made. I only filmed the one day when they were working on it, but they could obviously, it takes quite a lot of time, because imagine the skins are only that big, and then you need like 40, 50 of them to make a cloak, so it was very time consuming. And they wore the cloak as part of that, so that was really beautiful. And then another one, I recorded some oral histories with Auntie Val Orich, and that was they've only just published them it was a long weekend. I went up to Katoomba for the launch of that. And then another video I made was with Chris Tobin, who's an Aboriginal artist. I'm not sure if you're familiar with his work. He's from Katoomba and has done some really amazing work. And he started a bush camp out at Mount Victoria, just between it's on the road between the Great Western Highway and the Bells Line Road, and it was actually just after the big bushfires had come through. So actually, it's really beautiful, and fire is a natural part of Australian landscape, and Aboriginal people have used it traditionally to maintain. Obviously, a lot of the plants need to be burnt to release the seeds and things like that. So it's actually really beautiful because you can see all the greenery starting to come back out from the blackened, burnt landscape. And we filmed up there, and he started an artist camp where he just basically wants to take people, anybody, and they can go and just sit down and yarn and learn about Aboriginal culture. And he shows them, he doesn't use any acrylic paint, he uses ochre, and he paints on the trees. And as we know, Aboriginal art was ephemeral, so he talks a lot about that, and it's a really good education for people. And sorry, I've got so much to talk about. And then, so basically, I guess, just in summary, I'm actually writing an article now about oral history, and as most of you may or may not know, oral history is often deemed as unreliable or unauthentic because it relies on people's memories, and I guess that there's a big issue in academia particularly about the reliability of oral history, and it's often not recognised in academia. So that's something I'm working really hard towards rectifying, and also the use of Aboriginal methodologies. So yarning is a really important methodology that I use when working with communities, and when I go and work on a project, I basically sit down and I yarn with people for at least a couple of days or several weeks before I even chuck a consent form in front of their face. So that's a really important process. You need to get to know people in the community, you need to build trust with them before you even sort of start recording stories with them. I'm technologically challenged, so I'm like Therese. I employ my cousin Deborah Blacklock to do my filming for me because I'm lucky to record on my iPhone. Film and video wasn't. I did producing. I'm good at telling people what to do. I work with Brendan quite a lot, and so I currently hold two ARC Indigenous discoveries. One is called Keeping Culture, Koori Elders' Wisdom and Knowledge in Education. So I'm recording oral histories with 10 New South Wales Aboriginal elders, so 5 female, 5 male elders, and so we're filming that. Brendan's doing the filming. We're going to make, we might make DVDs if we've got money, or put it on. I think online's probably the way to go. It's easily accessible to everybody, and so as part of that, I think it's really important that recording oral histories with elders, and the idea is to have that available in schools, particularly the communities that those elders come from, and then also developing an education kit that will accompany those oral histories, so hopefully embedding that into the school curriculum as well. I'm also a member of the Mile Creek Memorial. I'm sure it's everyone familiar with Mile Creek, and my auntie Sue Blacklock is a descendant of one of the survivors, and we go there every year in the June long weekend. This year was the 180th anniversary, so it was really big. There was like thousands of people there. It was really amazing to see a lot of people come together to remember the people that were slaughtered there on that day. So yeah, and then I mentioned the project I worked with you. So I worked with Paula and Paul many years ago. What was that? 2000. Yeah. So a long time ago. So it was Australians in the Past. It was an ARC, it's a linkage.
Yes, and a discovery. Yeah.
And a discovery. And so Paula and Paul contacted me when I was still a curator at the Powerhouse and asked me to record some oral histories with Aboriginal people about the way Aboriginal people remember Australian history. So that was quite interesting, and then I wrote an article for their journal, so you can read that in Australian cultural history.
Yes.
My memory's good.
Okay,
Yeah, and now I work at UNSW Art and Design and try to embed Aboriginal methodologies and also Aboriginal pedagogies in my teaching practice. I'd say the majority of the students I teach are non-Aboriginal. I think I've had like 2 Aboriginal students in 2 years. So I think it's really important I always embed Aboriginal cultural knowledge in every course that I teach. Most of them are textiles courses, and I've taught honours. So one of my honours students from last year is doing a master's now, and he's looking at working with homeless people. And then his other supervisor's like, well, you've got an Aboriginal person, why don't you do something on Aboriginal homelessness? So, and he wants to create like a graphic campaign around homelessness, so he's going to work with Aboriginal people around that, so I think that would be really, really interesting.
Thank you very much. And our final speaker is Deborah Beck, who's on the one hand solo exhibition artist, and she also works with, and she's done multiple group exhibitions, but she also works as a lecturer, historian and archivist for National Art School in Darlinghurst, and she has special projects on which she'll no doubt tell you about.
Yeah, hello everyone. I've come from quite a different background really, in that I started as an art student at the National Art School, and I was always interested in history, but I started writing after my students. I realised that my students didn't know much about the history of the site, which is the old Darlinghurst Jail where I teach. So I started trying to find out a little bit about the site, and through asking people, informally at first, I started asking former teachers and artists about the site, and started compiling, handwritten interviews. And then I thought, well, actually now it's time to record them, and I did so on cassettes in those days, very badly, and then took notes from those. So it was really coming at oral history from a need base, but my art practice has always been quite closely linked to my interest in history. So I've always painted things around me that relate to the history of the places where I stay or visit or live and work. So, and the history of Sydney. So it's been a long process, but I did come to oral history quite late. I then realised that it was time to actually write a book about the site where I work, and that's where I actually did do the interviews. So I started interviewing a bit more formally, and I've used a lot of quotes from those interviews throughout my first book, and which has become called Hope in Hell. It's about the history of the site as a jail. I then decided after that it was probably time to study history formally, so I went to Sydney University and did my Masters in History, and that's where I learned a lot more about how to interview people properly instead of just doing it randomly, and I had to do all the ethics forms and everything, which I found quite tedious, but I had to do them, and I did I think it was about 50 interviews for that, and that was the Masters was in the theatre that was on the site of the Darlinghurst Jail, called the Cell Block Theatre. So it was actually a performance history, but it was still working with artists because there were a lot of exhibitions in there. And I interviewed people like John Bell and Yvonne Kenny and Nick Cave, and amazing people who had actually performed in that space. So instead of artists like had been the first time, I ended up doing interviewing performance artists. So it was very, very interesting. There were also sort of really interesting the happenings that were on in the Cell Block Theatre in the 60s and 70s, which sort of evolved, were sometimes filmed and sometimes online. You could see those, and I was able to sort of find those people, and like Ellis D. Fogg, and interview him. So, who ended up actually being interviewed again by me in the Sydney City Council interview. So I actually did a whole series of those oral history interviews for the Sydney City Council after I had done my Masters, and became a little known for doing interviews with artists. So I think I got called on because I'm an artist, and I'd worked with artists all my life, and worked with students and taught them about history and art that I got asked to interview artists. So it was interesting, and I helped choose who would be interviewed. And so there were people like Guy Warren, who's very old, and I interviewed him. He had been interviewed before, but it was more about his projects to do with the Sydney City Council site. So it was actually all the projects in the city area. And there were a lot of very interesting artists in that, like the people who were doing installations throughout the city or public projects within the city too. So that was it was a challenge for me because I didn't know all of them, and so I had to do a lot of research and find out about them and then interview them. And so just coming from that art history background was quite helpful in that way. So then the second book came out of my master's in history about the cell block, and my last book, again based on oral history, is a book on Ray Hoff, the sculptor of the Anzac War Memorial in Sydney, who's just sort of coming to a little bit of prominence now with the November 11th approaching, and the new work on the Anzac Memorial. So again, I interviewed people, but this time he had died 80 years before, and it became a little difficult to find people who had ever met him. So I had to rely then on interviews by other people. So Deborah Edwards, a curator from the Art Gallery in New South Wales at that time, had interviewed his students in the 1980s, again on cassette, and she had used a lot of those interviews in her research that she'd done towards an exhibition on him in the Art Gallery. So I said to her, look, you know, I would love to see that. All the people that died by the time I got to ask her about it. And she said, oh, I might have them. I might have those interviews. They might be somewhere. And finally, she did find them in her attic, and they were on cassette. And I have used them so much in my book. It's been amazing because they're talking directly. They knew him directly. They were talking about his life, his work, his art. His time at the art school, all those things were just so invaluable. So I suppose that's a lesson in keep everything, you know, and they've now gone into, they've been transferred to DVDs and kept in the Art Gallery in New South Wales Library collection. So those were found in the attic, you know, transcribed and re-recorded. So it's been copied. So that was a lovely result of research sort of leading to information that you would never find normally. The other people that I interviewed for Sydney City Council were people like Martin Sharp. Now, Martin was very ill at the time, and my first interview with him failed in that I went there and he said, I can't even get out of bed. So I had to go back again, and finally he rang and he said, look, come now, I'm well, come in. So I sort of jumped in the car and raced over with my equipment and sat there, and again it was one of those interviews that you'll never forget, because he had oxygen sort of attached to him, and he was like really very unwell, but he could speak, and he talked a lot about, he said, I don't want to talk about Luna Park or the Yellow House. I said, okay. He said, I've talked about them enough, and I want to talk about other things. And so I just said, okay, you tell me what you want to talk about. I want to talk about my time at the art school as a student, and my friends and my other life, you know, my life basically. So that's what I did. So I had to let him, you know, run the conversation really. But it was an amazing interview, and it's online too, so you can actually listen to it or read the transcription. But while he was sitting there, his friend Gary Shedd knocked on the door, so there's all this noise in the background of the interview, and I'm sort of going, okay. And he said, I'd like to bring in the painting for Martin to see that it was in the Archibald that Gary had painted of Martin. Martin had never seen it because he'd been so ill he couldn't get into the art gallery. So in he came with a painting that was probably 3 metres by 3 metres. It was so huge, and he sort of just got it in the door. And so I ended up with the two of them standing in front of this painting, with them talking about the work and how Gary had depicted, you know, Martin in the painting with Luna Park at the base and all those sort of characters from Luna Park at the bottom. And then I quickly grabbed my camera and got some amazing shots of them with the painting, and then Gary took it out again. So it was a moment in time that, you know, that was going to only happen once, and I just happened to be there for it. So that was a lovely thing to happen. So it's those moments that I like best about oral histories. There was another one. I've started an oral history project at the National Art School. So I'm interviewing artists, trying to sort of get people as they get older and before their memories fail. One lady actually rang me, she's 96, and I didn't know her name was Jean Dyson. And she said, look, I was going through your book, Hope in Hell, and I found a photograph of myself in there. And I said, really? You know, she said, yeah, I'm on page 55, and you know, that's me. And also, I was a student there, in, you know, in the 40s, and Dobell taught me, and they made me put on this very neat smock I didn't normally wear for the photograph. And I said, look, would you like to come in? Can I interview you? So she came into the art school. And during the interview, she also told me that her grandfather had been a warder at the jail. And so her father had grown up in the jail premises as a kid, seeing all the prisoners. I know, it was just one of those, again, amazing moment with an oral history. So I asked her all about her father's growing up in the jail as a kid. And, you know, she told wonderful stories about, you know, prisoners going out, the carts going out the gate with the, you know, the guards checking to see there were no prisoners in there with a pitchfork. You know, one of those old stories that you hear. I said, really? She said, yes. So, but that was good too. So that was great. So basically, my take on oral history links to my art, as I said, but I think it comes mostly from my educator. So my students, I encourage all the time to ask questions of the people that they're painting, drawing, getting involved with, and find out as much as they can before they just sit down and do an image of them. So I want them to find out about their background and the things. And so they often do now interview them on their phones and find out. And then they've got the history that goes with them, and that's been important. One of my students, Bonnie Jurek, has gone a long time ago. I taught her. She got interested in history because I was writing the first book I wrote on the site. And she's now basically running a lot of the programs out at Parramatta Girls' Home. So she's actually out there doing a lot of research, does tours, writes a lot on it. Yes, yeah. So she's and I actually went on one of her tours, which is really lovely, being a former student of mine. So I want to instill that in students. Others have used it in their videos, so they will do a lot of students do videos with their drawings and work with those. So there's one named Todd Fuller who's doing very well, doing a lot of videos, and he uses again history, oral history in his works, and brings in text and images into his drawings as well. So I think there's a lovely parallel in the way you can get the two things to work together. So
thank you.
All
right. Thank you. Three very different oral histories here. Accounts of lives, artistic lives. So I'd like to open it up for questions and discussion. Who's going to start? Yes, James.
Thank you, all three of you. Just the thought that I had, Fabri, as you were talking first, that picked up certainly, Deborah, in what you were saying, when artists are interviewing artists, so with the possum cloak making women. I'm just curious to know whether in the act of taking the oral history, when you're interviewing the person, the artist, whether there's any difference, whether you're interviewing them in a just in a regular situation, or compared to when they're actually making the art, when they're doing it, when they're making the cloaks, or when they're physically sitting, painting, or whatever it is they're doing, whether there's any difference in the art, the oral history that's produced as a consequence of the production of the art at the time of the oral history.
I'll let Fabri answer that, because I actually don't usually work with them when they're working. I've never interviewed anybody. I've interviewed them quite a few in their studios, so they will have their work around them, but I haven't actually interviewed anybody when they're actually working. Concentration might be tricky.
Yeah, look, I think that's a really interesting point, and I think it's really important. I think recording with them whilst they're making is really important. And I think go back to something Professor Stephen Mukey said in an art journal article I read many years ago. He was interviewing Paddy Rowe in Western Australia, and he was making a boomerang at the time, was making something, and and as oral historians, we know that we have to try and get a room that's got no background noise. And when I was filming, the actual ones that I did, like what I call audio-visual oral history, so my filmmaker's filming and he's like stressing out if there's like a plane going over and he's like, stop, you can't. And I'm just like, you can't. Yeah, and something interesting that Stephen said that was that he understood that process, even though you could hear this rasping noise in the background, it's really annoying to the audio, he understood that process was really important for Paddy Rowe. So to be talking whilst he's making the artefact, like to actually stop him from doing that would be kind of, detrimental. It ruins the whole situation, really. And likewise, like when we did the possum skin cloak, that was, Brendan's filming them all make. I think he cut out the sound for that, so he sort of played music, and then we actually took women individually into another room and recorded them in a quiet space. So then cutting that together. But yeah, likewise, I think that's it's really important not to disrupt people whilst they're making this, especially if they're talking as well at the same time. It's really important. They might be telling you a story about something that they're working on, or something quite significant. So it's really important not to disturb.
Actually, I'm a bit of a heretic about distant sound. I think that the problem with too many interviews is that they're done within the framework of sound engineering and those sorts of things. And in fact, oral histories are forms of sound, and there's absolutely no reason why you couldn't have had the sound of the, like what's wrong with this? It's in fact very important to have sound.
I've recorded bingo, sound.
Fantastic, wonderful.
And when I was, because I had to engage at a local club in the market gardens because there was no buildings and the club was the only place. So I set an office up there and I'd record the bingo and then I'd video separately a woman playing bingo,
Right.
and just as another layer. So, and bowls being played and all sorts of soundscapes, just the men talking,
Absolutely. Yeah.
Thank you.
You mentioned also,
No.
after you took the oral history of the 6 elders and the case studies, and then I guess you have to mediate those by putting it into written language into the PhD thesis, and maybe Therese is also related to your work. What main thoughts or reflections do you have of when oral history is mediated to text, and what do you have to take into account?
Yeah, that was
in that process.
Yeah, that was quite difficult. So obviously, actually, I transcribed them myself, which was painful. Now I send them to a transcription company. But likewise, it's very difficult to, sending Aboriginal oral histories to a transcription company. That's, sometimes they're outsourced to overseas. Language can be misinterpreted, particularly with my elders, they used Aboriginal language words throughout, so I had to, go back and double check spelling, and then also write notes in brackets about how, what that word meant. And I think I used different fonts for different things. So it was quite tricky, and trying to get my head around that and thinking about how they were presented, because I really didn't want to mess with them at all. I didn't really want to edit them down. I didn't want to change the context or anything, so it was quite tricky. And then again, part of that process, and that's what I'm doing with my other elders ARC grant, is actually going back to each elder with we're videoing them, so it would be an edited version, and then going over that with them to make sure that they're happy, giving them the opportunity to take anything out that they wanted to. Sometimes people say things that they might not necessarily want everyone to know about, so you need to give people that opportunity to be able to, I guess, edit their own story really in a way. Mostly, I don't think they took anything out from memory. But it was quite tricky. And then again, in the academic analysis, that did my head in. And finally, so I guess something clicks in your head eventually one day, and you just go, oh wow, that's how I'm going to do it. So in the analysis, I basically broke it down into, and I didn't use NVivo or anything, I did everything manually, so it's like, I didn't use coding, everything was just reading them constantly over and over and over. And I broke that down into a series of themes and then analysed it like that. So it was like, schooling, racism, education, early life, childhood, and something else.
Yeah, there's lots of checking sound and word. It comes back and you've got to be very careful checking sound.
Yeah, it was painful.
I'm hearing, I'm checking. There's lots of...
Yeah, rewind.
It's a lot. You would know. I mean, it's time consuming.
Therese, I just wanted to hear a bit more about building trust with the community, like Fabri was mentioning, that's the lead up of cups of tea and that kind of thing, and when is that context of media scrutiny on the community, that negative kind of thing, was that difficult, or did you have sort of connections and friends and family?
Oh yeah, well there's different communities I think would require different approaches and different demographics and all sorts of things you need to consider, and I do, of course, a statistical analysis before I do anything as well. That's part of it, to work out, the representation, particularly with the migrant market gardeners. There was a higher percentage of migrants in that region, and there were specifics they did sort of were higher in the national average in a few things. And it's funny because with that project, a lot of the I approached the local migration service before the project to see if they were interested, and they weren't interested actually. I think they became interested about 5 years down the track, but that was the reality. Because I wasn't a migrant, in terms of I wasn't from Southeast Europe. I was born here my descent is Irish, and so you approach it, for me, I map it out. So I map out the region, the area, I map out the key sites of those areas, might be one way of doing it. So I have to look at the landscape. I have to find the key players or the people that are the spokespeople, and I engage those sorts of bodies first and pitch what I'm doing. And then it's like a bit like forensic police work. That's how I see myself sometimes. And all ears and eyes as well, because you find the jewels. I like to find the people that aren't the big voices, although they're important. And referrals are absolutely essential. Like you get your trail during the interview. There might be 5 or 6 trails just with one oral history interview that it's always gold, like woo woo. And you've got to see whether people, because it's time consuming. You've got to see whether you screen them, because especially when it's not completely funded, you've got to screen people on the phone or whatever, maybe twice, to see whether they've actually got something of value to offer, what you're actually about, what you're doing. So obviously with market gardening, there's some key themes with farming and things. And with Belgetti, they wanted very specific things, down to buildings. So you've got to speak with people and find out whether they've got the information you're actually looking for. Because it's so time consuming. You often think, oh yes, I'll get back to do that. I know, I never get back. Because you've got so much to do, you don't get back. So you've got to get it all there. Hopefully, I learned that. And so that's sort of the beginning is, and because I was from the area and from a very large family in Green Valley, and we're all very active in very different ways, and known for, in areas, mainly sport, for example. There was nothing else to do, and at that time, everyone was very, represented. New South Wales and things, those sort of things impressed people there. My father was a retired policeman now, so he was a local policeman, which was interesting for me. And, so I knew a lot of people in that community, and I didn't know a lot of people. But everybody knows everybody, you know. And yeah, I mean, I suppose you just take your values with you and as well, and you just got to be editing before you're editing.
That's true. Thanks. Bob?
Yeah, just going back to the previous question. The National Library's Oral History Branch has a very extensive document on transcription and how to do transcription. I think you can, from memory, you can download it off their website. They work on almost verbatim for their system. We've adopted it for our cultural conversations project because we synchronise.
Can you speak up? It's very difficult to hear you with the bouncing off the walls.
Well, there's a specification for transcribing oral histories that the Oral History Branch of the National Library has. It's about a 20-page document. It's meant for transcribers, and it tells you quite specifically how to do an almost verbatim transcript. Now, we use that in our Cultural Conversations project because we synchronise the transcript with the oral history as it's played, which means you can read and listen at the same time, and people find that very useful. The problem we have with transcription is we use a company called Casting Words in America. It's about 95% accurate.
It's
and
called
Casting Words. Castingwords.com. They will return the 2-hour oral history transcribed for you overnight at about $2.50. That's not beneficial.
Yeah, time is money.
Okay, it's only 95% accurate, I understand that, but any transcription I will have to edit anyway, no matter what it is. So for me, when I do our 90-minute interviews, I trip it off to America and I get it back 2 days later because I use the cheaper rate, $1.20 a minute, because it gets me back 3 days, and that's all I need. And it's, you know, it's what we find is people like the transcription because a lot of researchers that use text, they go into text, they don't like audio. Whereas a lot of the people who we have access to the website, and we've got 68,000 visits on the website between August and May this year. Okay? And that's language that we use Korean and English. And the problem with transcription in foreign languages, there's no company forecasting words for Korean or Chinese or Malaysian. You have to do it yourself. So we add $1,000 onto every project in Korea just for transcription. Because it's a manual process.
Scott?
Thank you all. I'm wondering about using oral history in a gallery space or as part of an exhibition. If any of you have any experience in doing that or thoughts on how that might and might not work?
Yes, I've had an exhibition with sound, and you know, curatorially, it wasn't really well thought out by the gallery because, you know. Anyway, yes, I have used sound. I've used text. It was 2 screens. I think you've got to be really consider maybe ears or you know as well. I don't know what your question is, but yes, I have used sound, and I wasn't happy with the quality of what they were using to. It was getting in the way of everything else that was on the exhibition.
Can I just follow that up?
Yeah.
Have you ever used oral history to undercut, for example, the visual? Like,
Yes.
I'm actually interested in the relationship between the sound and the visual. So,
Yes.
and I think that's part of what Scott was asking.
Oh, right. So, I mean, it's conceptual, really. So, it's
Yeah,
however, you know, when you conceptualize it, really. Like, I can have people telling stories, and it's got sort of, and it depends, I suppose. I use it it can be as another whole new way of informing what they're looking at. You know, like what they're looking at may have nothing to do with what they're hearing. You know, or it would. You know, like it depends on what conceptually what you're doing. I don't know if that's answered your question, but yeah.
We say.
Sorry, Paula.
I just want to ask you respond to Therese and then we'll.
Well, I've probably said enough.
No, actually, I'm curious because you say it's that the oral relates has no.
It may not. It may not.
So what's an example of that?
Okay, so with the migrant market gardeners, for example, what they might be seeing is operating a tractor, for example. So the visual may be a moving image of they're looking at a man on a tractor so they're looking at that, and yet they've got 3 women talking about their migration journey to Australia who are tomato growers, you know.
Is that your choice or the gathering?
That's my choice.
So what effect does that have?
And then they're looking, I don't know, and then it could be a moving, well, and then there'll be, I had text of all the migrant names of the farmers on another screen, okay? So they're seeing the history of the migrant farming community, of their names. They're seeing how farming is operating today, and they're hearing the story of 3 women who talk about their growing tomatoes and what hard work it was and when they came here. So it's just sort of trying to, what I was trying to do was just hammer them with some information really good, but just absorb them into, what's the word, I can't think of the word, but just immerse them in that place and who's involved, you know, and the size of it, and I don't know, you know. And they were 2-minute videos, so I mean, it's not like then they're on a loop. It wasn't. It was all I had. I was briefed to make 2 3-minute videos. So I've got to think, what can I do? How can I do this to make it all? And I just added the sound as a you know, as like a PA system. It was almost like that, and I didn't, you know, got lost.
Hang on. Fabri wants to add to that.
So there was an exhibition that I worked on at the Powerhouse called Yinalangenu, Women's Journey. So that was an exhibition, recorded oral histories with 6 New South Wales Aboriginal women. And so as part of that we had, so the idea was to look at the ways, I guess, highlighting the importance of Aboriginal women in our culture as caretakers and nurturers. Of young people, and also caretakers within the whole community. And so I interviewed Annie Sue Blacklock. She talked about Mile Creek, the Kong sisters. I'm not sure if there's Dr. Marilyn Clark and Dr. Marlene Kong. So they're 2 twins. They're both Marlene's a GP and Marilyn's an obstetrician. Their brother's also, he's a ear, nose and throat specialist. They graduated from Sydney University. Professor Larissa Barrett talked about law, Arnie Beryl Carmichael, and Bronwyn Bancroft, I think. So the idea was to look, we're looking at different areas, so education, community, law, so Larissa like law, L-O-R-E, L-O-R, and L-A-W, and Arnie Beryl Carmichael talked about, so she runs culture camp, so the idea was they would talk about, you know, the importance of women for them growing up, how their culture had influenced their chosen career, and then we asked them to give us a couple of their personal possessions that would highlight their story, and then we complemented that with objects from the Powerhouse Museum collection. And then so they were all on the big. Each had a section, and they each had a screen where their stories were being played over and over, like on a loop. So yeah, it was a really good exhibition. But again, it was a bit tricky getting to get the whole sound thing, not being able to hear someone else talking over there. But it worked in the end. It was a really good exhibition. It was my last one when I curated.
Can I just add, sorry, one thing I didn't. The whole point of the women's voices for me was that you're only seeing the men most of the time, you know, and I just want to play with them a bit because the women are as equal to the men out there, and you never see them.
Cynthia and then Marie.
But Teresa, weren't you talking about projecting on a building at one point?
Yes, 4 women,
Yeah,
4
and
intimate moments.
How did that work?
Yeah, I thought it was great. It was 3 women from the Market Gardens and a woman from Green Valley. And the woman from Green Valley had fostered hundreds of children, an Indigenous woman, and, you know, led a very humble life. And so it was about bringing women into those male structures on buildings and showing, bringing them out from the fringes and sort of taking up these big spaces. I thought they were beautiful. One was on the railway, like on these sorts of, it's a big Bruno Tramaci just grieving her husband who had just died, sitting in her lounge room, and they were only short pieces. And doing some just their everyday activities, really. Just sort of, they'll call different titles: introspecting, imagining a woman doing, how they all do mosaic work, on this huge property, and here she is making her mosaics, and a whole property's embedded with mosaics, And
Was there audio or just visual?
just sound, no sound.
No sound.
And then there were four, and another one where a woman was, Ivica Boskovic, whose son had been killed, and her husband was dead, and she's walking around her barren chicken sheds, where they've been dormant for many years. So fostering, imagining. Yeah, so they're on different sides, full sides, big. I thought they were beautiful. And friends from the ABC came and they said, "Oh, you should see everywhere, Yeah, the art director of the exhibition thought that they were quite banal.
Sound and images together are actually quite hard to make work in an exhibition, as we were just saying, but a lot of people do it with headphones, and our students often do that. And so they've sometimes used interviews that they've done with artists or quotes or whatever in the headphones. So that seems to be the only way that really can work very without fighting other things in the gallery.
Museum curators are exploring different options.
Yeah.
They're not doing it enough. But if you go to sound led exhibition, it's a different game.
My question, thanks for sharing all brilliant, is about the duration of time that some of the oral history projects take. So someone you mentioned
Speak up.
6 years, 3 years, 5 years. How do you manage deadlines on working with cultural institutions and places in tight time frames when good oral histories need breathing space and trust and engagement and just about managing that side of things?
Well, I think I was given 3 months for the Sydney City Council. Were you about that time? It was very short. It was really short, and I did interviewed 14 artists, so it was quite a lot of stacks of research for each one, and it took me hours and hours. I just to head down and did it. It's just sort of time. It's just sort of all you can do, really. But it'd be much better to have more time.
So in some projects you can spread it out over.
Yeah, well, I mean, you see work advertised, and I won't apply for work where they expect like a book written and a whole 60 interviews done. They actually name the amount of interviews they want, and the project deadlines are like 3 months, and it's like, well, that's an impossible task.
Yeah, but part of public historians' work is actually to educate the commissioner as well.
Yeah.
You just say to them, it's impossible.
Yeah, but when you make inquiries, they don't tend to like that you do. They kind of tell you not to bother. Well, it depends. It depends on the work, and it depends who you're working for. It depends on whether it's local, state, or federal government. It's very much very different. There are certain things I won't go near.
Do those timeframes affect the outcome of the oral histories, the quality of them?
Well, they must, because the research is fundamental.
Yeah.
Discovering new people, discovering new referrals takes time, but
I think so. For the one I did for the City of Sydney Council, I can't remember how many. They actually wanted me to interview more people than I did, but obviously because of the time frame and because funding is always attached with a deadline, and for some reason it's always like the funding runs out in like 3 months' time, but they've had it for like 6 months or a year, like just trying to sort the project out. So for that project, it didn't affect the quality, but it did affect, I guess, the variety of people that I wanted to. Like I could have interviewed probably another 5 to 8 people, and also, some of them were interstate, and just that whole, coming to Sydney because we're on a tight budget. I can't fly to Brisbane, and I missed a couple of really good people that would have been really amazing just because of that.
And it's exhausting. It's exhausting.
Yeah, because you're on the phone chasing people and like
the actual interview,
and you're asking people for their time too, and necessarily most of them they don't get paid, so it's like you've got to give up a couple of hours of your time.
It does. Like I did a project in King's Cross called Conversations at the Diner, and that was a small funded grant that I got, and but I'd done a lot of prep before I got the grant, So I'd done a year's prep before I got the grant, and then I could sort of hit it real quick. but it was exhausting. It's exhausting to interview 14 people in 3 months. One a week is because you've got to be, I like to be sharp, and you can't be numb and drained, and you've got to be fresh. And, so
You're not likely to be that 14 times in 3 months.
You know what I mean? So it's, and you do it, but it's like doing sometimes 2 a week. And I don't want to sound precious because I'm not, but it's hard because if you're carrying a lot. If you're meeting with people that have never spoken about their story before, you're hearing a lot and you're guiding them, and you've got to guide. You've got to take. There's a lot, and I don't think people out there. I don't think those big people understand what's actually required. And I was like in Cameron Archer, got to understand the work.
Okay, Bob, and then
Just go back to your question about in the gallery. We had 2 interesting experiences. One was Andrew Christopher's rag.
Is it possible you could go to the mic? I think that the air conditioning shatters all of the sound.
I don't even know if it's working.
Andrew Christopher's ran the kiosk in his gallery in his exhibition at King William. So he had his work up on the walls, and in the corner we had a computer running with his interview. And it just ran. And one of the feedback we got, quite a bit of the feedback said, people could actually understand his work better because he was talking about his life and why he made his work. So that was good for him because maybe it increased sales, I don't know. The really interesting one we had was the very first one we did was with my wife. She had an exhibition here at Sandino Black Gallery. And again, we had a kiosk running of an interview where she was talking about her work. And what I noticed and what I had not expected was people would sort of look at all the work and they may appreciate it or may not. Then they would go and listen to the interview and they'd see your work on the screen, and Yvonne would say, this work is about that, and then they would disappear and have a look at the work. So they would random access into the exhibition. The curator got really annoyed because they spent an awful lot of effort laying this exhibition out, and then people were just sort of random accessing this stuff based on what Yvonne was saying. But again, the feedback, they were understanding the work better. So it was a way of sort of making it a little bit more palatable for people, which I thought was really interesting.
Okay, Rosalind.
This is about collaboration, and I wonder, Fabri and Deborah, you've worked on 2 memorials in one place, and whether there was any collaboration between you or between the City of Sydney commissioning were you the City of Sydney? Anyway, collaboration, full stop.
Yeah, so I did. I actually interviewed Tony Albert as part of those. So his story about Thus Did Let Fall is actually on the Oral History website as well. And actually, if you know the story, so the actual story behind the inspiration for his public artwork is actually based on his family's oral history. The story of, I think it was his uncle. So that's quite interesting, and as part of that I interviewed him as well, so it wasn't just and originally the idea was that I would record oral histories and then he may use some of those stories for the inspiration for his artwork, but that's not how it happened. So
But you've both worked on war memorials in the same places.
Yes, it is interesting, but I didn't have anything to do with that one, and I've just been writing about the history of but one of our artists, Fiona Hall from the National Art School, has now done a new work inside the new museum there, of course, and at the Anzac War Memorial. And she's been doing interviews and a lot of interesting research to get to that point, and going out and meeting a lot of people who had families who had died in the war. But we didn't actually.
There's plenty of people
not
out
much going on between the two of them.
I don't know about that sculpture, that artwork really confronting.
Oh, it is.
No, she's not.
Did you know the story behind it?
No.
I should tell you something. I can't remember exactly. Sorry, I can't remember if it was the uncle or his father. So that they were POWs in I can't remember what country. Was it? Yeah, it was. Yeah, I think it was. And so obviously they've come in and they've started shooting some of them, and then they realised that they were POWs and they weren't supposed to be shooting them, and his uncle or his father was like second or third along, so he basically just missed out like being killed. And so the fallen bullets are the people that were shot, and the ones standing were the people that was miraculously, with some stroke of luck, didn't get shot.
Oh, that makes sense.
Yeah.
It'd be good to have an interpretation panel there, actually.
They don't do that with public
No,
artworks. No.
Because I think when people look at it, they don't get that.
Yes, ironically, it's about war. That's what war
Yes,
is.
yes,
And yet,
that's right.
as a mere member of the public, I think, why?
Yes.
I think if you look at your journey, I think the story might be on the City of Sydney website.
Okay.
Yeah.
Great, thank you.
And there's a book. So his auntie gave me the book of the whole story. That's the whole oral history, but that's just a small part of it.
Oh, thank you.